Good evening. You're listening live to the Extreme Movie Show. I'm your host, Rob. Tonight's episode, Kickin' It, a return to martial arts glory, as it were. I've with me the real RDV, karate RDV, whatever you want to be called tonight. I don't know, but we wanted to talk a little bit tonight about the history of martial arts films in general and why we feel they're a very neglected currently film in the United States at the very least, and why we like them so much, and why karate movies, action movies are a staple of the Extreme Movie Show. Good evening, sir. How are you?
I am doing great. Ready to talk about Kung Fu movies.
Yeah, actually, so on the Extreme Movie Show in general, the 80s is our bedrock decade, and we've covered a lot of action films, and we went to a certain sequence starting in the 70s, particularly with United States films. As we were growing our audience, we did a lot of the Chuck Norris films, with the Octagon, his magnum opus to me, Lone Wolf McQuade. And we, of course, did a few Jean-Claude Van Damme films, which, again, a little bit different style. And we talked about how in the 80s there was this almost renaissance of martial arts films that did not rely on wire work, did not rely on special effects, practical effects by whether you like them or not, personally speaking, or their styles, legitimate martial arts from Chuck Norris to, again, Jackie Chan, we've brought up several times, and even the Girls with Guns from the 80s into the 90s with Cynthia Rothrock, Amy Johnston in particular, and a few others. So to me, I just know we just want to talk a little bit briefly about the history of them too. And I wanted to kind of start off by saying with martial arts films, I go back as a kid, a child in the 70s, went back when there was only 3 stations, maybe a 4th one if you got lucky. And there was something here in Central Florida by the Pine Hills Palace. We got a station out of Tampa called WTOG, as far as the eye can see. And they would show 2 things that captivated me after Saturday morning cartoons. They had the creature feature, which Paul E. Bear would host. And that was one of the first shows that I've ever seen that did that. But then they had Kung Fu Theater, where you'd always see like a Shaw Brothers type film, whether it's from the 60s or 70s. I had no idea who Bruce Lee was. Of course, he had made movies in the 70s before he died and was extremely popular, and we'll get to him in a minute. But for me, growing up, monster movies, martial arts movies is what I cut my teeth on. And then when I got into the 80s and started having awareness of these wonderful action films that are out there, I guess looking back on it now, Doctor, I was a little bit spoiled. So let me ask you first with martial arts, what's your personal history? How did you get into them?
Well, first of all, I want to say that this video is unlisted around currently, so no one can watch it. And secondly, I got into watching Jackie Chan. I honestly watched Chuck Norris here and there, Missing Action, Delta Force. But, I mean, I really didn't start watching the more Chuck Norris movies until I started, hang out with you in the channel, Just, getting more in-depth look at the Chuck Norris movies. But I was more of the Jackie Chan stuff. I like Rumble in the Bronx, Police Story. As I go back and I just, like, I look at all the movies that they came out in the 90s. And then by the 2000s, we're getting like maybe here and there. I think Netflix and Amazon have really helped out as far as for people to try to find martial arts movies, because there really isn't really an outlet to go for. If you're looking for martial arts movies, you might get whatever Hollywood produces. And when I say Hollywood, I don't consider their martial art movies to be actually really martial arts, because Hollywood has their own slowing down, their own kind of like a ballet version, versus like I said, you can get with Tony Yang, or you get with Bruce Khan, you get with Jet Li, like I said, the Hong Kong productions, Sammo Hung and like Jackie Chan. You look at their stuff, how it almost looks like it's sped up. No, but it's actually not. Hollywood actually would have to slow it down, so that's why they speak. They're in order for them to match what they're doing, because when Jackie Chan, numbers he said in the 90s after like Super Cop in Norman the Bronx, he said, "I'm going back to my own, do my Hong Kong, because it's ridiculous. Your stuntmen can't keep up with me. It's like you want me to slow down everything." And it's not authentic. Then it's fake. Either you know how to do these the martial arts stuff, or you don't know how to use it. And for you to basically speed it up on camera is just a false product, a false feeling. It's a lie. So that's why he kind of went back. He left kind of like Hollywood. He did Rush Hour and stuff like that, but he majority went back and started doing his own movies again. But it's
I think Jackie Chan's first person that comes to mind when you think of it, martial arts films, because he was a crossover artist going into the 80s here in the United States with having an appearance at Cannonball Run that was very memorable. It was the goofy movie that had Dom DeLuise and Burt Reynolds and everybody else in there too. And as a kid, I go, I don't know who he is. He was driving the race car with his person there, and they had a big fight and outside at a diner or wherever, gas station. I remember as a kid going, I don't know who this is, but it was cool. And it reminded me of all those like Shaw Brothers or Golden Harvest type films that we would see. And one thing about martial arts films that I want to bring up too, because I think it's very important, is that no matter what your politics may be or what country you live in, because we have the biggest international audience on our channel when it comes to doing martial arts films, because we've intentionally really tried branching out and not just saying, okay, we're going to do United States action films or United States martial arts films, to be more specific. We've done several others, and we plan to continue doing a lot more. And one of the key components that I'm talking about here of martial arts films that was very interesting to me and noticeable, even as a young kid, without appreciating the physicality or the styles or the historic nature of some of the set pieces you would have in some of the martial arts films, is this. Martial arts films were one of the first films that I recall that were, especially by 70s standards or even 60s, very multicultural. And by that, I mean, you could have a black person on screen. You could have a very strong female presence that was actually doing the ass kicking in addition to the guys.
Mm-hmm.
You could have representations of different classes in, say, in a Shaw Brothers film that maybe you didn't understand what it really meant. Whereas if you're, a fan of that kind of film or living in that culture, you would go, oh, that makes more sense or whatever. So some of those historic elements may have been lost on you. And yes, there was a way that those films changed once we got into the 70s and 80s with Bruce Lee. But one of the films that we've talked about a lot here that seems to be the only current one is the Amy Johnson film Lady Blood Fight, which is like a reimaging of the JCVD movie. But going back to the 70s and 80s, I think we have to take a minute, of course, and talk about Bruce Lee. He was obviously a very small guy physically, 5'8", maybe 135, 140 pounds, was taking enhancements at some point later in his career, whether it's injury or not, died eating some bad hash with his lover, not his wife or whatever. No big deal. Nobody cared about those things, but it's real life. But he had such an influence in Hollywood with Steve McQueen and a bunch of people taking lessons from him. I think he gets a lot of extra credit because he was the right guy in the right place at the right time. And I like to call that luck, but people still love his films. People still get the martial art part to it. And it all goes back to that scene with him and Chuck Norris getting ready to fight in the temple. And, they're doing their warm-ups, not looking at each other. And the black cat shows up and all that too. People go back and say for Bruce Lee, that's it. And who do we have in Bruce Lee? We've got tons of other guys in there that would go on to do other action movies because of how successful that film was.
I will credit him being the first person to cross over into Hollywood over here. And it is true to say without Bruce Lee showing up and doing what he did, you probably would have got any more Chuck Norris movies, would have been as popular. You also wouldn't have had Jackie Chan finally crossing over into Hollywood in the 90s. Because the 80s, for the most part, a lot of those people in Hong Kong, productions also were in Hong Kong. Because it was kind of, like you said, I almost feel, I personally feel like, I said, Hollywood's always shunned martial arts movies. If it's a foreign film, they don't really care about it because they'd rather make money Americans buying American stuff. They don't want them looking at overseas stuff because it kind of puts their stuff to shame. And like I said, martial arts thing is like, to me, growing up as a kid, martial arts was much more entertaining than watching some of these other action movies. I know, like, and then the kids who grew up in the 50s always loved the cowboy western stuff. To me, as a kid, that martial arts is my western stuff, my cowboy stuff. It's just cool. It's like, man, it's like one guy taking on like 50 guys and just defending himself. That's awesome. That's like everybody wanted to. And I think that's what made the Green Hornet with I guess it was Bruce Lee again with playing Kato, why it was so cool, because like, hey, superheroes, you're defending yourself, martial arts. I know there's a big craze in the 70s and in the 80s where all these dojos started popping up where people started learning how to do self-defense stuff. Today they're still around. I don't know how popular they are still, but I kind of feel like, a lot of people have just kind of forgotten about martial arts movies. They're more into whatever like Twitter tells them, social media tells them. But I said the great thing is that if you're willing to look, Amazon has a whole catalog full of martial arts movies for free with Prime membership. Same with Netflix has a bunch. it's cool. Streaming, you didn't have that back in the early '90s. I had to go to Blockbuster, and whatever they had, that's what they had. Planet Video or Planet Hollywood. That was the other one, the competitor. Whatever you found is what you found. And sometimes you could go to those the adult DVD players or video stores. And sometimes you'd find like they have adult section, and then they have the rest would just be martial arts stuff. It was just weird because it'd just be there. I don't know why, but
Right.
that's how it was. Kung Fu Theater Ed said it's what brought him here. And hello, Ed. I hope Kung Fu brought you to this channel as well.
Kung Fu Theater. That's exactly what I'm talking about. A double feature for me with Saturday mornings.
Yeah, and people will always when they think of Asian movies, they think of Godzilla and the bad dubs, and it's true with a lot of stuff. They were still learning how to do translation. There's always going to be translation errors when you're trying to get from language to English. The words aren't always necessarily mean the same thing when you translate them. So, and plus people make mistakes. But the great thing about that is I thought when Jackie Chan transitioned over to Hollywood, he taught himself English. In a lot of his movies, he had someone dubbing over him. But then you notice that as he gets later into the 80s, in the early 90s, he's actually he's actually speaking English in his movies. And I don't know if everyone else is dubbed or if they learn English too. Because remember, he had his own crew, so maybe they all learned English together. Because they always use the same villains or the same heroes, or same supporting cast. They just rotated them. Sammo Hung speaks pretty good English too as well. But,
well, yeah, and leaving politics out of here, I will say obviously things have changed a lot since the 50s and 60s worldwide stage. Whether you're talking in China or Japan, the United States, Vietnam, and Thailand, and everywhere else too. So, I will say that I think the main reason why I think there's a twofold thing here. We say, well, why won't Hollywood make really good martial arts movies? I think the answer is simple. If they would make money, they would do it. But here's the thing. Let's say that they said, hey, we can make a cheap martial arts movie, but the problem is you got to have people to do it. And outside of, say, Scott Adkins or Amy Johnston, maybe Gina Carano and a few others, Ronda Rousey, maybe, that type of martial arts stunt work type action is just not really popular here in the United States. And again, going back to China, for example, you grow up basically, like Jackie Chan is the template in the sense that you would go to what he did, the opera theater, where he was taught acrobatics and kung fu and weapons and those types of things. So you would have in the culture that being a very important piece of a person's life. And so you have tons of people that just have a basic grounding in it. And so you have your crews that do it. And the other thing too is again, not doing a deep dive here, is I think the insurance cost is extremely high. And you can take somebody like I think the action movie in general has changed a lot too, because it's guns and all that. And I think the Bourne Identity really changed that a bit. But don't tell me Matt Damon's an ass kicker. I mean, I'm not saying he can't do it or whatever, and didn't do a good job in the film, and it didn't look good.
He was a samurai, remember?
But the point is, it's not the type of movie that we've talked about. So when we did our Girls with Guns series, that we started with a few films, Cynthia Rothrock, Michelle Yeoh, and a few others. You see them, and they almost have a similar template to like a Jackie Chan film. The last Jackie Chan film we did, they're chasing these bad dudes. It's an 80s film, and they're going up the stairs a little bit. I'm picturing here too how they have the big roundabout, and all of a sudden a bunch of ninja come out and they fight. So there's like a little chase thing. There's a little acrobatics thing. Jackie usually likes to put in a little bit of climbing, whether it's up a wall or up the side of a building or something like that.
There's one with the Ferris wheel.
Yes, that's what I'm thinking of. And to me, I'm looking at it going, okay, you get all these little bits of physical play that somebody's doing that is just, to me, visually stimulating enough to watch. And I don't know. I prefer that, and I've always said I'd rather have martial arts films where even the little kid, working the hot dog stand knows martial arts, and even though it sounds kind of weird, and if you intellectualize it, go, that's stupid. There's not going to be two groups of evil ninja at a theme park. Yeah, I mean, it's very disappointing. But you had, because of Bruce Lee, those people that were popular in those films in the 70s are a part of it. Black Belt Jones, all these types there too. Bolo Young, who's in like 200 films, is the bad guy typically. They have their success, but it's a handful of people. America had that, but by about 84, 85, like we've said, that's where things really started to drop off, because people are making big budget Hollywood action type films as opposed to martial arts films. So even Seagal's films, which I still say his early films are pretty good, entertaining, they declined. JCVD went big box Hollywood. So everything that brought you to the dance, people got away from in the late 80s, early 90s. And, no disrespect to somebody like Schwarzenegger, big action star there too. They're great big budget films. They're nice and they're fun, but there's still something about going back and just getting hypnotized by people, even with the cheapy sound effects, beating the crap out of each other, martial arts fights with a different setting, with something going on in the background. It's awesome.
Well, the thing is, it's true with Hollywood now. As far as making their own martial arts movies, their insurance comes in it as far as safety risk. Lawsuits. They're afraid of someone getting hurt. Where you realize that Jackie Chan, when he first started off, he did all those risks himself without there's no insurance. If he died, he died. Like those things. He looks back. He's like, I didn't get famous till I was almost 50 years old. He said, I was in my early to mid 40s. My back was shot at the point. It's like, I never saw my family. I had my wife, my kid. I got to the point where my marriage almost ended, and finally I broke big. It's like, I was able to finally was able to sit back and relax and choose what movies I wanted to do. He was taking any role he could. But like I said, but the great thing about it though is I like it when there's not, because I feel like Hollywood babies actors too much. Like the stunt doubles do all the work, the most dangerous work, and like I said, they don't get the credits. Who gets the credit? Some nitwits who doesn't even know how to do anything. And it kind of irritates me with Cobra Kai too. It's like, unless the person actually on screen, I don't know if the guy playing Johnny or Ralph Macchio, if they even know any moves at all, or they were just just like when they start fighting, if it's back to head, you can tell it's a different guy. I don't really pay attention that much, but it's like I just feel like a lot of the martial artists, that actually do the stunt work should get more movies. And I'm not saying, well, maybe people say, like, well, they're going, well, maybe the kids can't act. I think a lot of it is they don't get even the recommendation. Bruce Kahn, he did all the movies. He worked on The Medallion. He was one of the bad guys. He did stunt double and stuff. He finally got his movie in 2018, a South Korean movie called Revenger. He was phenomenal. It's like, I want more like that. It was, it's like one man. It's a one man, taking on a bunch of guys, breaking legs. You hear the legs and bone snap, and I was like, oh, it's crunch. It's like, and you see the guys in physical pain. Sometimes you'd actually see the bone sticking out. It was like they actually used the props. I said a lot. Now I don't want to crap on movies like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, where they do all the wire work, but even that stuff doesn't even get in Hollywood at all. You'd think it would, but over in China and in Korea on their TV shows, they use this stuff, and they do focus on a lot more. I'd say more. Their stories are more towards peace and stuff. They promote peace. They're more have science, like a fantasy setting or comedy.
And I think too, where that's changed a little bit too, where films have gotten modernized even by their standards. Instead of having period pieces or martial arts would be a thing you can demonstrate weapons and all that. You had, of course, at roughly the same time with Bruce Lee, movies getting hot and him dying is the TV show Kung Fu, which is a personal favorite of mine. I also watched that as a kid, and it was unlike anything because it was a Western, but it was a Eastern Western, meaning, it's got, it's like the whole fugitive kind of thing, and the theme of a stranger going from town to town every week that became pretty much a very good staple template for television, like especially with Quentin Martin Productions, The Invaders, The Fugitive. And to me, with Kung Fu, with Bruce Lee, whether or not he was in it, and they got David Carradine in it, it was very different at the time, but it was the right show at the right time too for a couple of years that I think helped with America get an audience for it. Because without it, I just don't know if we would have had it. So I want to give props to the TV show.
Man is a great thing they could do as a TV series if they really wanted to. Even though it's it is a guy. He's a master as far as martial arts stuff, and then these people invade, and then the war comes. They are invaded by the German or the China. Japanese army invades China, and I love that stuff. Where you have that kind of setting where you're kind of occupied, or just being invaded, and like I love like stuff like look at the was it not Gladiator but Spartans when they had
300.
300 yeah 300 stuff like that. But I mean like you're doing feudal Japan and stuff are awesome. Now we always complain about CG being wrongly used, but sometimes I watch some of these Korean shows or these Chinese TV series stuff, or it's just movies. The CG isn't that bad because they know how to use it. It's not like we're gonna put like Godzilla on the screen and only show his foot, and then it's always dark and rain because we suck it because we don't want people to see the CG.
Mm-hmm.
They actually make it where you actually can see the CG and it looks beautiful.
There was a show that was really popular in the 70s too that I would watch occasionally with my father, but I think it was on late at night, so I didn't see a lot of it. But it had it was called Cannon, and he supposedly was like this really fat San Francisco detective, I think it was, but because he knew judo, that was the big thing with a lot of people that were in not just Vietnam, but Korean War, World War II. People that learned martial arts that came back also could have an appreciation for it. That's where a lot of it culturally came to the United States. He supposedly knew judo, so every once in a while you would see this big overweight dude with an incredible voice, and he would do this little like hip toss, and that would be the big thing, or he'd do like his karate jump, and it would just be so bad. And it's like, really, it's mainstream for that, but it was so telling that even that made it into the 70s, and then it started to die off, I think, big time in the 80s. But
hey, Jim.
good evening, Jim. But no, one of the things I wanted to finish off to here is just to point out that martial arts films are still viable; they're still out there. Do quick notes on some styles. Obviously, there's a few females out there that we've covered. Amy Johnston, we've covered Michelle Yeoh. There's a few others that we haven't got to. They're younger and up and coming. We have not covered Tony Jaa, who I've really liked several of his movies. Even if the plot just exists for them to do his acrobatics, I'm on board with that because it seems just phenomenal. So I'm sure we'll be doing some of those soon. But again, the thing I mentioned to start off with this whole show is that historically, for me, early on as a kid, to see this multicultural representation, especially women, is incredible. And there's definitely some female martial artists that are out there. I know Hollywood's kind of had some hybrid crossover stuff there too. And that's not to say Gina Carano or Ronda Rousey can't be effective there, but I think we judge people based on their lifetime commitment to it, that it just seems so natural for him. Even in someone like Sammo Hung that may not be the skinniest guy in the world, he still moves very gracefully and has his own particular style. And that's really what I think it all comes down to. I don't particularly care for the wire work and all the flying around stuff that's a part of a lot of Chinese films.
Yeah,
I'm not crazy about some other stuff, but then other stuff
it's a story. I
really like. Yeah,
it's a story more than it is martial arts. But like if you were actually, I said, do you want martial arts right now? Is Donnie Yen. I mean, Jackie Chan's, he's up there in age, so he's still doing some stuff, but he's not like he used to be. Donnie Yen is, as far as Ip Man, I've been watching. I just started watching the second one. First one, I was like, I like, but then the second one, I'm enjoying it more.
I just can't take him beating Mike Tyson in the fight. And that's in 3 or 4. Or I just can't. And that's the problem too, is that some of his stuff is so sped up.
Wait, Mike Tyson.
He's in one of the Ip Man movies.
Is he really? Now yes, I have to watch it more.
I'm serious. But it's just, when we see these older films, we saw a lot of people, a lot of guys are like, 5'7", 5'8", 5'9", 150, 160 pounds. They're all relatively the same size, except maybe Bola Young, who's like 5'6", but he was a bodybuilder, 200 plus pounds. And even he was super graceful and all that. It's realistic when it's like that. And what you had mentioned before about Cobra Kai, I think is a perfect example of the Hollywoodification of these type things, where you just go, man, I'm just not buying it. Or you take someone like Scott Adkins, where that dude he's good looking, he's got a great physique, he's believable, but it's almost too acrobatic. It's like, I get that you can do a 720 thing off of a car and dressed in a ninja suit and this and that, but I don't know. There's and he churns them out, and I really appreciate that he's there doing it. He's one of the very few that I think as a stunt guy that gets into a lot of movies like Amy Johnston that we can look at and go, okay, they're legit. So the purpose of us actually doing Kicking It was not martial arts films in particular, although it's one of our favorites. It's really to talk about what we consider action. And action for me is not CGI. It's not gunfights. It's not gung fu like some people say. Oh, Christian Bale in Equilibrium. Screw that. Yeah, it was cute. It was nice. I don't care about that. It's hand-to-hand combat with two people. It's weapons. It's acrobatics. It's climbing. It's physical skills using your body as a tool. That's the art of the martial part to it for fighting that I really, really, really like. What do you have for your final thoughts?
My final thoughts are I want to just talk about some of the people that you should be watching if you're going to watch anything. One of the new people you're watching that came out from the Raid, and Raid 2 is also his name Ikio Uwais, I think his last name is Uwais. He's mainly doing the Sumerian like tiger style fighting. You got Bill Superfoot Wallace. If you've never watched anything with him, watch The Protector with the 1985, the Jackie Chan film. And this dude is like he's been known to be like he can deadly clocked at basically doing a roundhouse kick at 60 miles per hour. Like that guy kicked you, you're dead. Sonny Chiba. He was in True Romance and has also been in some other stuff. He was in Kill Bill. Really cool guy. Like I said, we also got. I'm looking at some of this listing here. Jeff Speakman, who's on
Perfect Weapon.
Yeah, Perfect Weapon. Single-handedly taking on the mafia. You got Dragon Lee, which is basically the South Korean Taekwondo and Hapkido expert, and he's often credited as Bruce Lee due to his resemblance to Bruce Lee. He started in Clones of Bruce Lee in 1981, a documentary about the great man, the real Bruce Lee. There's a lot of people in here. There's Chang Pei. She's in this classic Come Drink With Me. She's also Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. Mm-hmm. So yeah. So like I said, there's Stephen Chow, Kung Fu Hustle, man. I know it's not really, but it's like the guy when he's serious actually does the moves. He actually knows what he's doing. There's quite a few you can look on here. There's Toshio Mafione, Seven Samurai from 1954. He was also in I believe there's Seven Samurai, and I think it was called Shinobi or something. I think it was called, where he is basically like a fistful of dollars, where he basically plays two warring rival families against each other, and then walks away with the money. I think that's what fistful of dollars was. Yeah.
Well, there's definitely a lot to get to with that. I mean, seriously, and there's more out there that we aren't aware of, and that's part of the fun of having a channel.
Michelle Yao and Cynthia Khan, which we covered in Madam Young, mm-hmm. or basically all the In the Line of Duty movies. That's Cynthia Khan takes over from Michelle Yao. Michelle Yao was just recently in the Mulan movie, which I believe if they would have done so preachy and stuff like that, if they actually would have stuck to the actual Mulan story, it actually could be done pretty well.
Yeah, and again, without bringing politics in there, I mean, the way China has an influence in movies these days is definitely there. We've talked about Korean films, how they'll take the American template and they'll Korean-fied it, Hollywood it up, their own version. We see that too with some of their action films. It doesn't mean they're bad films. It's just that's one thing there too. You find out what you like and you stick with it and you follow them.
I think isn't there one called The Kingdom of the Dead where it's on Netflix? There's one where it's a feudal Japan and they're surrounded by zombies.
I think it's The Kingdom. One of our listeners brought that up. It's very period piece looking. It's very rich looking. It's not bad actually.
Go look at They Come at Night, I think it's called. But the guys I forget what his name is, but it's on Netflix. Look it up. It's basically about a guy who basically he's a former triad member. He betrays a triad and protects his little girl, and he has to go through like waves and waves of these guys with freaking hatchets, just defending himself. His friends will get murdered. He's the last one, and that Yukio Wei guy, or Yukei, the guy from the Raid is the bad guy in it. But also check out The Hand of Death, Jackie Chan, 1976. All the early Jackie Chan ones. Yeah, it might be badly dubbed, but look at those. Even Drunken Master or Young Master, look at those. Those are just hilarious to watch. And what's great about Jackie Chan, he's always been like the one that shows you the stunts at the end, and how he hurts himself all the time. So it's like, ouch, when he actually does it. Like, they show was it Police Story? The first one, I think it was. Where it was in a Super Cop. I know that where he went down the lights, in the mall. Yeah, and he actually his hands were kind of bloody towards the end. He's hurt. His hands are hurting because he cut himself. You know, and they only did it once. They didn't do it twice. You know, like in Hollywood, like you know, let's do it again. No, you know, no. He actually went down. And everything. His hands popped and everything. By the time he was done at the very end, they had to like his hands were just like.
Well, that alone gives you an appreciation physically for seeing it. And I think the one key thing about these is even if you check your brain and it's a dopey plot and wooden characters, as long as there's the fight scenes are somewhat captivating or interesting or maybe a little different than something you've seen before, or even if they're not and it's still enjoyable and you're not bored of it. I think that's the key thing. And the more you watch of karate films, action films, martial arts films, the more you have an appreciation for what people are doing with it. And Jackie Chan showing his failures at the end of the movie, I think something that doesn't get talked about a lot. But
they're bringing up, they're bringing up, any Kung Fu Zombie movies. Ironically, that you say that, there is actually a movie called Kung Fu Zombie in 1981. You can watch it free now. It's on Tubi. It's about a criminal.
Tubi TV.
Yeah, Tubi TV, man. It's a criminal comes to town in order to kill Billy Chung over a past dispute, but instead of getting his own their hands ready, he hires a tailless wizard to animate some zombies to do the job for him. So it's like I said, Kung Fu Zombie movies. Isn't there also Wu-Tang? Wasn't like those movies? Not the band. I thought there was like some like Wu-Tang movies.
We're not good enough to know all the different styles.
But like I said, with Kung Fu martial arts, if you're asking if it's out there, it probably is out there. Because those guys did anything and anything just to make a story, and there's probably thousands of just movies. Not all of them are probably translated, sadly. But I don't know. It's like I've watched some of the movies on Amazon, especially the Jackie Chan stuff. Like, and you have the option that you can watch it in English dub. And I was like, I'd rather just watch them Cantonese, or Hong Kong, whatever they speak. To me, it's much more easy because most people complain like, I don't want to read the subtitles. You miss everything. After a while, if you watch enough, I know this because my mother, who watches for the past 4 years, she's been watching ever since she got Amazon and all that stuff. She's been watching all these different martial arts stuff, all these the Korean stuff, and she's actually starting to speak Korean to me now. I kid you not. She said, she's like, I said, how do you like? I said, how do you understand what they're saying on here? It's like after a while, you kind of hear the same words repeated over each movie. You kind of understand what it is. Like you can start identifying. It's like I said, then you're ordering the Chinese from now on, or any of the Korean food we're buying.
Yeah. Well, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. Just a brief history of martial arts films. Some things we think are important about it, worth noting. Try to give an idea of the lens we're looking through as we're going through and checking out martial arts films as a bigger part of the Extreme Movie Show. And again, it's not just completely martial arts on here, but we love them so much, it has a tendency to kind of fill it up. So we want to just touch base and cover that because we've been not doing them as much lately, and we were wanting to get back to this. So we thought, hey, let's just tell people just how great martial arts films are. So there you go. Jim and Dave, thanks for showing up, listening tonight too. RDV, thanks you for showing up tonight. As always, everybody, thank you for listening, sharing the channel out. Stay extreme. Good night.
And watch